Okay, I think we can go ahead and start. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon or this morning, wherever it is you're joining us from. Before I kick it off to Todd, I just want to go over a couple housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded, so if you need to leave at any point, feel free. We will be sending around the recording via email once it has been processed. You can use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen to ask the presenter a question today. We'll be getting to questions at the end of our session this afternoon. And if we're unable to address your question live, feel free to follow up with us via email. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So without further ado, I want to kick it off to Todd.
Great. Julie, thank you. Thanks for getting this rolling. And thank you all for diving in and participating in this little webinar, which we thought would be helpful at this time of year as schools start to really dive into their hiring and make some final decisions and solidify their faculty going into the 2021 academic year. As Julie shared, my name is Todd Gochman, and I've been at Carney Sandoe for over 20 years now, handling the sciences for over 12. So have a pretty good sense as to ways in which you can best prepare yourself to land a job in an independent school, and that will be our focus here. So we'll talk a little bit about some trends that we're seeing this season in this unique hiring landscape that we're all navigating, and then also just discuss some really just kind of logistics that are going to be important for you as you prepare to land a job. So as you can see, we'll go over kind of timing of where we are in the season. We'll talk a little bit about materials, your dossier and kind of profile enhancements that will be beneficial for schools, how the interviews are taking place this year in this virtual landscape, and of course, what we're seeing in the marketplace in general. And then of course, take questions at the end. So I think if we dedicate around, 30 minutes or so for this, I think that should suffice. So as you plan or the next little bit of time. So at this stage where we are now, the beginning of May, we are in the throes of the hiring season. The best way to describe it is that we are in the second half, or probably in the third quarter of the hiring for schools. While January and February were a little slower on the position listing side, when schools were still trying to figure out what their enrollment numbers are going to look like for the fall. They have now discovered that they're feeling good about where they are and are eager to hire for any vacancies that they're needing. So schools are listing positions. They've been pretty active with us over the past 6 to 8 weeks. So we've seen a little bit of a lag in those position listings where we would have usually seen them in January and February. We're now seeing them in March and April, kind of later in March and April, and so far in the first few days of May, there's been some good activity out there. So which means that schools now are eager to hire and will want to make decisions ideally by the end of June. Most schools will wrap up by the middle of June. In an ideal world, that's when most schools want to solidify their hiring, prepare their faculty for over the summer, and be ready to go for the fall. But I think as we think about the timing now, schools are going to be interviewing and hiring pretty swiftly going into the end of June. And ideally before the July 4th holiday. I think that's kind of everyone's hope. But I could see hiring dip into July a little bit this year. But that's the timing of kind of where we are at this stage. So we are really kind of right in the throes of it. Important to follow up on any positions that you are being informed of by myself, and then reaching out to those schools and going through whatever process that they're requiring you to go through. So as we think about kind of the next step here, how best to prepare yourself and the documentation that you need to put together. Obviously, you got to have your resume current, a personal statement. We'll talk a little bit about personal statement versus the cover letter, letters of recommendation that are going to be important to include, and then some profile enhancements, which you can put together on the profile with Carney Sandoe. The resume itself should be pretty clean and straightforward. Education followed by teaching experience, any sort of core experience you've had as a teacher, a volunteer, teaching assistant, any opportunity you've had working with children. You want to make that front and center on the resume. For someone that is transitioning from higher ed and looking to get into secondary school, the research and the publications and that component of your professional expertise is important and great to have on the resume, but it does not need to be as front and center on the resume, right? If we're looking for a teaching opportunity in a school, and as independent school administrators look to hire a faculty member, they want to know what sort of experiences you've had working with kids. They want to know what sort of experience you've had as a teacher, right? Being in this kind of leadership role as a leader, role model, mentor for students at any age. But particularly if you've had some good kid experience, you want to get that front and center on the resume. Any sort of volunteer work that you've done or extracurricular work that you've done is also helpful, because schools are not looking for just a one-dimensional educator, right? They want to hire somebody who offers a versatile skill set in addition to the core academic piece, be able to contribute as an advisor to a group of students, be able to contribute as a coach or a club leader, or helping out with community service. But being involved in the community in some capacity is hugely important. And it's so helpful for students to see their chemistry teacher or their environmental science teacher also out on the soccer field or doing some community service work or being part of a Spanish club, right? And that's really important. So schools love to hear about the passions and interests of candidates as they interview for positions. Academics first and foremost, and then of course, the extras on top of that. And if that comes through coaching, or if it comes through, an innovation lab, makerspace, or community service, that's also fantastic. So any sort of work that you've done there is going to be really helpful for you to include on the resume, and then make sure that's front and center. But yeah, make sure your contact information is there. And a very typical format would be your contact information up top, followed by your education experience, followed by your teaching experience, then other professional experience and research or awards or other interests would then follow. And it's okay to have a 2-page resume. I think if it goes beyond 2 pages, it gets a little cumbersome, especially for hiring contacts as they're reviewing a lot of materials. So a 1 to 2 page resume is the way to go. We talk a lot about the personal statement. If that's a unique document, schools do value it. They do want to see what you have to say in terms of why you want to teach. And that's what the personal statement really is. I think for someone who is an experienced educator, been teaching for 15 to 20 plus years, I think making it more of an educational philosophy would definitely suffice. But I think what's more tangible and what schools really value are those personal statements that really talk about how you engage your students. What do you do in the classroom to get your students engaged in the material? What do you do outside the classroom in your community? What are ways in which that you are participating in your school that make you unique? And that's what the personal statement is. It's all about you, right? It's personal. So a colleague of mine likes to say, the resume is the what it is that you've done, and the personal statement is more of the how. So that's kind of another way to think about it. But it is a valuable document. School contacts do look at them and do read them, and that's why we think it's important just to keep it to 1 page, which definitely can be challenging. But I think a 1-page document is the way to go for the personal statement. It serves as a nice addendum to the resume. But again, it's all about you as a teacher. It's about your desire to teach, your excitement to be a positive role model and mentor for kids. And that differs from the cover letter, right? The cover letter is more of a document that you use when you follow up on a particular position in school. So we will say to you that if you're interested in a particular job, to send a cover letter, right, when requested by the school. And the cover letter should be very short and sweet. But really emphasize your desire in the school and your desire of the opportunity in the school. So why are you interested in the school? Why are you interested in that particular position, right? Very succinct. And, pull information off the website, from the school's website. Get an understanding as to what the feel and the vibe is of the school. And you can indicate in the cover letter that by reviewing the school's website, you notice their commitment to this, and that. And that's something that resonates with you. Or, because you're relocating to a particular region, you have been doing research on schools and this school resonates with you because, right? That's something that is important to emphasize in the cover letter. It's very, again, specific to the school and the opportunity. So personal statement, again, is more about you and personal, and then the cover letter is more about your excitement for the job itself. Within the Carney Sandoe profile that you've created, there is a place to request letters of recommendation. And so if you go into the My Materials tab, and I think Julie's going to be pulling up a screen here, there you can see request letters of recommendation. And by clicking that button, that basically generates an email to a reference of yours that you can send them a link where they can upload a letter directly into your account. So it remains confidential. It's very easy, very straightforward. So that's a great tool for you to utilize. And then down below, you'll see the endorsement piece. The endorsement is very similar to if you utilize LinkedIn, kind of the recommendations on LinkedIn. So perhaps there's a colleague of yours that you've done a project with, or there's someone that you have a good connection with, but it may not be a core reference for you. That's where the endorsement can come in. Just kind of a quick paragraph that kind of promotes you and kind of celebrates you as someone who is a positive role model and mentor for kids. But the letters of recommendation should be from supervisors, should be from folks that can really speak to you as a leader, as a role model for kids, as someone who's going to be an amazing community member, team member, and can really speak to someone who's going to be such a positive influence for the students that you come in contact every day. So think of the letters of recommendation are going to be kind of the real core references for you, and then the endorsements are more supplemental. That's probably the best way to describe it. The other piece within the profile is the profile enhancement section, which will come in the form of answering questions. So on the profile, so there are 5 questions that I think you can find within the profile, and here they are, right? And any answers to these questions will then be viewed by the schools that we refer you to. And these are really helpful just to add a little bit more depth, a little bit more understanding of you as a teacher, as you as a community member, a team member, and someone who's going to be a positive role model for the students. So you can kind of sense the theme here, right? It's just really schools trying to get a truly better understanding of how you can add value to their school, not just through the academics, but through the community aspect as well. But this enhancement piece is a really nice addition there. So those, and I think pulling in all those documents, a resume, a personal statement, and letters of recommendation will truly round out your dossier with Carney Sandoe. And that's what we love to then present to schools. And schools love it because they are able to see the full picture of your candidacy. So having those materials pulled together as quickly as you can is incredibly helpful. It's okay if things kind of trickle in over time, and we know that sometimes letters of recommendation take a few weeks before they are fully submitted into your account, and that's okay. We can start the process with just a resume, but it is helpful to get those documents in as soon as you can. In terms of transcripts, those are also helpful. Schools do like to see them, particularly if you graduated from a program within 7 years. That's kind of the timeline that schools like to have really view a transcript. So recent graduates from undergrad, that's really important. Or if a recent graduation from a graduate program, that's also going to be important to include, because schools like to see your coursework and see where your real area of expertise is. So something to keep in mind as you think about all the documents that you want. Excellent. So now that you put all those documents together and we start getting your resume out to some schools, you'll dive into the interview process. And this year, the interview process has been a bit unique because we're still dealing with a pandemic here, and all interviews are virtual right now. While some schools have started to open up campuses to visitors, truly, most schools are interviewing via phone and video. And that's just how the process is going to be. So what does that mean for you? Well, it means that you have to be prepared, right? You have to go on some great questions, have to do your due diligence on the school, whether it be reviewing their website, whether it just be doing some research on your own through your own networks and learning about the school. But being prepared is going to be key. I mean, I always say this to anyone for any interview, is that you have to be prepared, you got to be professional, you got to be positive, kind of the 3 Ps to a successful interview. But it's enhanced more so in this landscape because you're not going to have the chance to shake hands with somebody, right? So those intangibles of meeting in person are somewhat lost through this virtual space that we're all in. So with that being said, being as prepared as you can and having in learning about the school, and then having some great questions prepared is going to be really important. Also, schools will be diving into these virtual interviews a little bit more intensely to find out if you're going to be someone that's going to be a good fit for their community. And so be ready for conversations that might be a little bit more philosophical, or some questions that might be a little bit more challenging earlier in the interview process. And that's not because the school's testing you. It's only because the school is trying to maximize their interviewing time and truly understanding if you're someone who's going to be a good fit for their school community. Now you can flip that, right? You also can ask those challenging questions and those discerning questions to see if it's the right fit for you, right? As much as schools are interviewing you for opportunities, you also have to interview them, right, to see if it's a school that's going to be a good philosophical match, right? Does your style as a teacher, as an educator, align with the approach and expectations that the school has of you? So I think that's going to be a unique component to the virtual interviewing approach. But again, I think preparation is going to be the key. Schools know when they're talking to somebody who's done their homework and someone who's not. And schools love it when they talk to somebody who comes in prepared, right? And that just shows also that you are taking this seriously and that you're really excited about the job. So schools love that. So if you're really wanting a particular job, do your homework, right? Do your due diligence, go in prepared, be professional in the interview, and stay positive, right? And I can't emphasize that enough. And I think if you hit those 3 markers really well, then your percentage chance of securing the position increases drastically. Now, I don't necessarily have the statistics to back up that point, but I feel pretty confident saying that those 3 things will set you up for success, no doubt. What sort of questions could you ask, right? This might come up in a Q&A later, and we can talk a little bit about that. But I think understanding expectations of the position, I think asking about what the schools look for in a successful faculty member, what has made someone successful in their school, what does a graduate of the school look like, or how would they describe their student body, and that can give you a little bit of a flavor of what the school is looking for, in their members of the community. And you'll hear about that a lot, right? Community, right? And that's really important. And every school will talk about that. But every school does it a little bit differently. So it's a matter of finding a place that's going to work well for you and your style and approach. But I will say, I think no matter size of school or location of the school, the expectation that all schools have of any faculty member is someone who's going to step in the classroom, serve as an advisor to a small group of students, and also contribute to the community outside the classroom as well, right? That's a no-brainer. whether it's a school in downtown Manhattan or it's a school, somewhere in the Rocky Mountains, right? It's going to be that expectation of that you are going to be adding value to the students' learning experience and educational experience, in a variety of ways, and making those connections and building those relationships. That's what schools are really looking for as they, go through that interview process with you and finding out, are you aligned with the mission of the school, and maintain the integrity of their program. So as questions come up throughout your job search regarding the interviews and the steps of the interview that you're in, I'm happy to be a resource and a sounding board for you as you go through that. So please reach out at any time regarding interviews. Excellent. So in terms of trends, and I kind of touched upon that briefly, what we are seeing is that schools are hiring, and the positions are coming in. I think we are seeing that enrollments are pretty strong among the independent school community on a national scale, both boarding and day schools, both K through 8 schools, K through 12, or 9 through 12 schools. We are seeing definitely schools who are hiring and finding success during this pandemic. And I think independent schools, generally speaking, are intentionally smaller, so they have a little bit more flexibility to be innovative. They have a little bit more of an ability to be nimble and make adjustments on the fly. So they have been able to be open during this year, which families have absolutely gravitated towards. So we've seen a lot of schools have a growth in enrollment where maybe they were not having that much success over the past few years. So it is definitely a good time to be entering the independent school community as a faculty member. That's definitely happening. Schools are also emphasizing quite a bit professional development among faculty, not just subject area wise, but also in the realm of social emotional learning, also in the realm of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So having some professional growth there could be hugely beneficial for you. And so that's something to be prepared for as you go through those interviews. So any sort of growth you've had there on a professional level or just an interest level, be ready to talk about that in an interview. But that's definitely something that we are seeing trending wise through conversations with schools regarding, in addition to the academic piece, that understanding of that social emotional learning, which I think schools see are so important. And of course, in this year, kind of that emphasis on diversity, equity, and inclusion within schools as well. So just a couple other trends that are taking place out there that you should be prepared for as you go through the interview process with schools. And generally speaking, in terms of kind of best practices, I touched upon it a little bit before, but staying in touch with us is helpful. Doing the preparation, and in some cases, it might be, depending on your job search, hurrying up and then waiting for the right job. And that's part of job searching, right? It's part of getting everything ready, getting everything prepared. So as soon as the right job opens, we can then capitalize on that. And then you're all set because everything is dialed in terms of your documentation, and we can present that to schools. And then you'll be a step ahead because all the materials are in place. But I do think that's really important, is the preparation piece. And I've heard a number of stories from school contacts over the years where they went into interviews so excited to connect with somebody, and then the interviewee just kind of fell flat because the preparation just wasn't there, and that was kind of disappointing to the school. So I can't emphasize that enough. And I know it sounds like kind of a no-brainer to do, but it is really important to emphasize the preparation piece that goes into that. Staying in touch with us is also hugely beneficial. I'm in communication with schools on a daily basis. So understanding if there's a school that you are really excited about or not excited about, that's helpful for me, because then I can share with the school, oh, you need to talk to so-and-so. I was just in touch with them this morning or yesterday or whatever it may be. And also, if I know that you're active in the job search, then I'll keep you, pretty tuned into the opportunities out there. So that's just good to stay in communication with me as we go through this process. And then, we'll work together until something solidifies for you or you say stop. So that's kind of the where we are in this process. Some other best practices for you to keep in mind, I think, would be making sure that the documents are updated, profile is current, and just making sure that everything is as updated as possible. The cleaner things look, the more current they are. I think it's those little pieces add up to increasing your chance to really secure a position that you're going to be really excited about. So yeah, those are the pieces that I wanted to share with you at this point. I know that we're at a place now where we can probably answer some questions that might come up. And so, yeah, Julie, I know that you've been taking a look at those questions coming in. So curious if there's anything we can dive into right away.
Yeah, Todd, thanks. I do have a question related to resumes. And
Yes.
If a person has been out of grad school for quite some time, is it relevant to include TA experience on a resume in addition to later service as a faculty member? But is something like that still relevant to include?
Yeah, good question. I do, because I think it's hands-on experience in a classroom setting, in a leadership role, working with students. And even if there's been perhaps a gap, or if it seems like it's really far, at least it's something, it's a relevant experience that schools will look at positively. So I do think that would be important to include. And if that's your first teaching experience, I think it's a great talking point too, as you interview, that was kind of your introduction. And then you've had other experiences on top of that. But that could be a good piece to include for sure.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I do have some questions from the folks who registered in advance that I can go through. If someone is unable or unwilling to coach athletics, I know we talk a lot about being willing to coach athletics as a kind of a bonus. If someone's unwilling or unable to do that, are their prospects diminished, and what else can they do about that?
Yeah, good question. So I think a very natural and historically common balance of expectation that schools have had has been a teacher coach, right? Teacher subject, coach a sport. Over years, right? That has definitely transitioned, right? Because not everyone is a coach. And I don't think it diminishes someone's opportunity to get a job if you are unable to coach a sport. I do think it diminishes the chance to get a job if you're unable to contribute outside of the classroom. So as I was saying before, I think being one-dimensional is something that schools are really trying to steer away from, and hire somebody who is more multi-dimensional, with the academics truly being at the core of what you could offer, but then also adding something else. I was talking with someone earlier who shared that they have a very strong background in coding. And I thought, oh my gosh, that would be fantastic, because schools are always looking for a faculty member who can contribute through that capacity, right? And that's a growing area in schools, right? Kind of this makerspace lab, innovation lab, kind of STEM experience, Lego robotics, coding, that engagement is as valuable as being a JV basketball coach. So the other piece that I would also say is that schools are really emphasizing service learning and community service engagement for students to contribute outside of their school community and the greater community, however that looks like. So someone who can help out there, maybe lead a Habitat for Humanity program, or lead kind of a volunteer kind of in the local soup kitchen, whatever it is, that is also as valuable as coaching a sport. So I think the theme that I'm trying to emphasize here is that it's not so much, quote unquote coaching as it is contributing outside of the classroom in some capacity that engages the students, that also allows you as a teacher to connect with the kids and build a relationship and make connections outside of the academics. If you're not necessarily connecting in the chemistry classroom, maybe you find a connection on the van ride into town, going to the local soup kitchen. Or maybe you're helping out with an art project in school, working with the student, and that's where a relationship is built. So that's why I think schools really value those educators who can contribute outside the classroom in some capacity. But coaching always is kind of a default. And I think that's just a historical context of what schools have done for so long, and where there's a lot of interest. But that's not a deterrent if you're unable to coach a sport, not at all.
Great, thanks, Todd.
Yeah.
I have another question related to the status of whether or not schools in the US are recruiting teachers from outside the country and how that's working with the pandemic.
Yeah, good question. We work with independent schools all throughout the United States, and there are schools that definitely do sponsor visas. However, we have noticed over the past 2 years, well, last year being an incredibly unique year, where there really wasn't any visas being offered. This year, while there might have been a few schools out there that have offered visas, it's very limited. We do work with schools that will sponsor an H-1B visa or a J-1 visa, which is more of a cultural visa. But this year, we just haven't seen that happen all that much. There have been some folks that I've had experiences with that have needed the visa piece and are qualified educators and just not getting the traction within the independent school community. So we're hoping that next year, things will open up a little bit more. I think with the financial commitment that schools need to make for the visa process, I know a lot of schools have really made some challenging decisions this year in terms of where they're looking at their costs, and that's an area that unfortunately is not getting much traction at this time. So yeah, I feel confident that in future years, the visa process will kind of kick back into gear and schools will be a little bit more willing. But this year, I think schools have remained a little bit more, a little tighter is the best way to describe it regarding the visas.
That makes sense. Thanks, Todd.
Yeah.
Do you have any sense from schools as to what their policies will be around vaccination this fall?
Yeah, good question. I haven't heard anything definitive, but I do know that there are some schools that have tossed around the idea of asking all faculty members to be fully vaccinated by the time the school year begins. That is a conversation piece that's happening. I do believe there will be schools that will require that. And it is something that it's out there. I don't know how ubiquitous that commentary will be. I do think many schools in the United States, many of the independent schools will be requiring, but I don't have enough data points right now to say definitively that that's an absolute. But I would be prepared that it would be a request that many schools will have. So that's just something to be prepared for as you think about next academic year.
Thanks, Todd. I'm sure that's a question that's on a lot of people's minds. So I appreciate you answering that.
No doubt. Yes, but yeah, it's a conversation piece out there that I know is happening, and schools are having conversations around that.
Great. What are some ways to highlight your skills and expertise if you don't have a lot of teaching experience under your belt?
Yeah, so if you don't have a lot of teaching experience under your belt, what have you done that has put you in a leadership position or a position where you've been working with kids, right? Have you worked in a summer camp working with kids? Have you been an after-school tutor? Have you been a tutor in general working with students? I think anything that has some relatable skills to working with kids, being a role model, working in a team, being a leader. These are all things that schools look for, right? So I think emphasizing any sort of leadership positions you've taken on, anything you've initiated that you've created, I think is something that could be wonderful to include on the resume. But schools are looking, and again, I say this often, but it's so true, and they're looking for positive role models for kids. So anything that you have done that has put you in a leadership position, put you in a role where you've had to communicate appropriately, effectively, professionally, that's going to be really important. Have you been a coach, right? Have you worked in an environment where you're working with kids in some capacity and building a project? That could be really great. Summer camp experience, any sort of club leadership experience that you may have had in college or graduate school, or some sort of volunteer work that you've done in your community where you've taken on a leadership position, that all of those things can add real value. So I think that's really where you want to emphasize. So if you don't have the core full-time teaching experience, you want to think about those other leadership and volunteer experiences where you've built a skill set in understanding how to communicate professionally and appropriately.
Thanks, Todd. I have one more question from somebody who joined us a little late, and I'll turn it into two parts. Could you just reiterate again kind of the outlook for the coming school year, what we're seeing in terms of supply, in terms of jobs? And then, sorry, part two, if you could speak to anyone in the audience who might be coming from higher education in terms of and wanting to kind of pivot to secondary, and if there are certain things they should be including on their resume or their personal statements or things like that.
Sure. Yeah, I think in terms of where we are in the season, positions are coming in. Schools are needing to hire, and we've seen a little bit of a surge of opportunities pop up in the past 6 weeks. And I do think schools are going to be making some decisions by the end of June. So here we are, May 4th, and I think the next 6 to 8 weeks will be pretty busy in terms of job opportunities popping up, schools conducting a series of interviews, and then making final decisions. Ideally, schools want to hire by mid-June, right? That's when most schools will be wrapping up for the school year, and then they can prepare their faculty for the fall. So that's kind of an ideal timeline, but we also realize that could be pretty quick for a lot of schools. So I do believe that schools will be hiring into early July this year. So as you think about the timeline of the job search, that's the next 8 weeks in particular is when you want to be really focused on making sure that all your documentation is as current as it can be, and you're following up with the positions you're most excited about. As far as transitioning from higher ed into secondary school, I think an emphasis on any sort of teaching experience that you've gained as a teaching assistant, or if you're taking on some courses on your own, I think that's really important to emphasize and put that on the resume, right? Education section first, followed by that teaching experience would be next. All the research that you've done and the publications that you've been a part of is fantastic, but it doesn't need to be as front and center on the resume. That can be kind of pushed down a little bit. And it could be a selected group of presentations and research that you're proud of that you want to include on the resume. It does not need to be kind of the full list that you've accomplished. You will run into other folks that have had that sort of experience and background that are in independent schools. So I do think it's helpful to include, and it's a great talking point. But it's not necessary to have an exhaustive list included on the resume. So really emphasizing teaching experience, emphasizing any volunteer experience you've had working with kids. Those are the things that really should kind of be front and center on the resume as you look to transition to secondary schools.
Thanks, Todd.
You got it.
Unless you have any other final words, I think that's it for today.
Excellent. No, I think staying in communication and staying updated on what's going on out there, and staying in communication with me is going to be the best thing moving forward. And then please, as other questions or other concerns arise, please reach out at any time, email or call or text.
Thanks so much, Todd. Thanks for your time today, everyone, and enjoy the rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate you being here.
Bye-bye.